Hi everyone, I'm here with Paul Sweeney today from Webio, and he's the co-founder and chief strategy officer for Webio, who are in the chatbot and automation space. So Paul, thanks very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I know that we're chatting next week, actually, with a few things around. You've got a podcast that's being launched, and it's called what? Credit Shift that's being launched. So that's going to be available on all podcast platforms. And also you just launched Debt Chat as well. So I thought it'd be great to get you on, talk a bit about some of the things that you've been seeing. And then I know that we've been pinging backwards and forwards around large language model, generative chat, just based on your experience and what you do. And so I particularly wanted to chat about that in particular. So the podcast that's coming, just explain a little bit about what that is and what you're really going to, I suppose, focus on with Dan Blogovich. I think your podcast partner in crime.
Yeah. So I guess it stems out of the conversations we've been having across the industry for a couple of years now. And I think it's pretty well established at a senior level that everyone is going digital. They need to be much more digital, and digital transformation is the name of the game. But I think that's step one of the journey. And I think what happens when everything goes digital is you've a lot more data and you've a lot more challenges about what your business is going to be doing in the future, what your role is, how you differentiate, what your services look like. And what we wanted to do was to start the conversation about, okay, everything's going digital, and then you're going to have AI rolling in pretty quickly behind that. And then what does the future look like? And what kind of services do people expect to get? What's the implications for the industry itself? And I don't think it's out of place to say that we believe this is such a big shift that it's like, I was around from the shift in around 2000 to hosted services and cloud and software as service. And I remember people saying, oh, it's not going to happen. Who's going to do things in the cloud? Who's going to do things like allow their software to be up there? And by 2008, it was a done deal. Like everything was cloud. Then we had mobile overlapping, people remotely checking accounts and managing themselves on their mobile phones. That was a huge change. I think social was a bit of a misfire, but aggregated into the business of kind of Facebook and Twitter, mostly Facebook. So we didn't really see the big changes from that. But AI is definitely a platform level change. So we want to tease out some of the implications of what that might be and what the systemic effects of that might be, and then what it means for like competitive positioning, competitive strategy. What is it that people have to really start wrestling with as issues?
Yeah. And where do you think we are on the change curve with that, as just as an example? So you talk a bit about cloud computing. I remember it all being talked about, cloud computing. No one was doing it. Everything was still on premise. And it's really took 3, 4, 5 years. And you could even argue that the pandemic was a big thing that's really changed cloud computing, because everyone wanted to have software as a service as a result of that. It really accelerated it. But where do you think we are with this? There's a lot of noise around AI, a lot of noise around large language models, really what we're talking about with AI. Are we just at that start of that change curve, or do you think it's going to accelerate really quickly?
I think it's going to accelerate really quickly, but I tend to overestimate how quickly. So I have to self-correct. So let me, by very nature. Yeah. So I think that the difference with these technology curves now, these days, is once the internet was in place, the next wave of technology sat on top of that. So like mobile services actually leverage an awful lot of cloud to make them happen. And now mobile is in place. So like computers are ubiquitous because we all have our phones. So the next level of innovation through AI now has access to all our phone-based technology. So you'll see someone like ChatGPT now has an Apple app. You can download ChatGPT and start like using an intelligent assistant on your phone. And that leapfrogs so many other barriers to adoption. I don't know if you've downloaded it on your phone yet.
I have,
but you start, like when you start pressing the button and saying something into it, and then it starts generating the response, and it's making that little vibrating thing on your hand, and you go, wow, that's something else. And that's just, I think that's the equivalent of getting email on the internet. It's like, that's the base level thing it'll do. There's so much more going to come behind that that it's I follow this kind of daily. So when you see the pace at which things are changing, I pity decision makers. That's what I think, because you make a decision today, tomorrow something happens and you go, that was the wrong way. We need to turn back.
Yeah, I mean, it's had incredible adoption, hasn't it? I can't remember the stats, but it's one of the fastest launches ever, particularly for ChatGPT. I read a stat earlier that was saying something like, I think it's in the US, it was something like 40% of people are now using it as part of their job or something. The adoption's been huge.
Huge.
I feel that I also think a lot of people are using it and not necessarily saying they're using it as well. And certainly my conversations with North America have been, it feels like it's been even more adopted over there than it is over here in Europe, really.
So I think there's a bit of culture difference here as well. I think you're pointing that out, and we'll come back to the safety aspects and the safe use aspects. But what it's showing is, it's in business terms, is signal. It's saying people want to use something like this to help them do their jobs or to help them work. And I love asking people when their bosses aren't sitting there, so how are you using it? Are you using it to do some of the coding work? Are you getting it to parse for you? Are you getting it to turn it from one kind of code to another? And, oh, yeah, I'm using it to do this and I'm using it to do that. And so all the developers everywhere are using some version of a Copilot to write basic stuff or to do basic tasks. All marketing people are saying, get me a first draft of this, like first draft PR release, first draft marketing materials, first draft email. And it's getting good enough now that it's okay. First draft is nearly done. Just a little bit of fiddling and then out it goes. And now I'm just super productive. Like, I showed this to people and they just literally said, I got to go now. And I put down the phone and went straight at it. So we just gave them a secret weapon that they can use to get all the work that they need to get done. Yeah. And when you go to a senior person and you go, are you using anything? And they go, well, what would I use it for? And you go, okay, let's start with simple things. Are you writing anything to your company? Like, what about the CEO letter, the update? How are we doing? The stakeholder letter? How are we doing with our investor letters? How are we doing with, and they go, oh, I didn't realize I could use it for that. And then you start thinking about, oh, are you aware that, like, the generative aspect of this means that you can change your behavior about how you're interacting with the technology. So just change your persona. So acting as, let me say, give it a football man, acting as Alex Ferguson, famous manager. I want you to write a pep talk to my team as if we're down 2 goals going into the second half, and I want you to inspire them in the manner that he would do. Use all the available TV footage, use all the available XYZ to get that done. And then you get back something that's inspiring, that's fiery, that has adopted some of the language and maybe tone that he would put into that message. And let's say you find that incredibly useful as a first go. And then you might say to yourself, yeah, but how would Alex Ferguson maybe identify players that he needs to take aside and give an extra bit of coaching? And you say, acting as Alex Ferguson and using the following sets of information and data, identify the person that he needs to have a talk with and identify the tone of the intervention that would result in increased performance for that player. And then it generates, hey, Paul, I realize that it's tough that this is a high pressure environment, but remember, people are counting on you. Your teammates are really looking for you to really run that midfield. And I go, okay, gee, the team, I got to step up for the team. It's not about me. It's about the team. And that was perfect intervention for me, right? So I think that what we'll see is that as we learn more and more of what the potential space is for using the technology, as it unfolds as to how it can help us, you'll actually see much more of it being used. And therefore, I think we're only at the beginning of it, but I think it's going to be everywhere really quickly.
Yeah. It's almost like the invention of the car or the washing machine. It's kind of like once you've used it, it's really hard to put it down because it just saves so much time. I mean, if you're washing clothes manually and someone gives you a washing machine, in this case, pretty much for free, would you ever go back to not using it again? It's really hard to put down. And the whole question around whether we should have controls around it or not, it just feels like it's just going to be too hard for people to stop, because if you're saving 20% of your time and you've got all this extra functionality, why would you not use it?
If I could just expand on that a little bit, I don't know, is it Hans Reisler, the data guy who's famous for his bubble graphs of data?
I don't know.
I think he's on YouTube. I think it's Hans Reisler. Reisling. He famously showed this graph of family size and GDP of a nation. So as family size decreased, GDP went up, and average incomes increased. So he showed how it evolved over time, and it's a very good data visualization example. And he had another example where he said that one of the great things that the clothes washing machine brought was his mother was freed up from all this time that she was spending washing. And what she did is she read. And so with that time, she was able to educate herself because she hadn't received an education that at that time in the country she was in. So she was able to use that time to get educated, which means that then she got another job, and then she was able to bring her family that next step out of that cycle. And so what happens is, I used to say about the example of around 2000, I was working at a telco, and we used to think about broadband or DSL and ADSL. We used to think about these things as being able to deliver like video on demand. And it's to go, yeah, it'd be like movies pumped into your house, like at lightning speed.
Yeah.
And it'll be amazing.
Yeah.
And the competitors to this will be the cable companies who are providing multi-channel like experiences, and they'll be providing telephony and stuff. So we're going to be competing with each other. So broadband was going to be faster movies. That's essentially how they conceived it. But actually, broadband brought us remote working. And with remote working, we were able to be fathers at home with our families. So broadband brought us time with our families to develop relationships and develop better relationships with our kids, be there for when they come home from school or collect them from school, and actually build better relationships with our families. So I think the second order and third order impacts of technologies can be far bigger. They just take a little bit longer to wind out.
Do you think, this is an interesting point, do you think that's actually a bigger driver around psychology than the business driver? So I'm just looking, for example, I've got the Apple goggles that have just been announced, or the other one was the Microsoft Copilot, and you saw that one there. And they talk about work-life balance, but it's often I'm doing something at home, but this allows me to now also do my work as well. Whereas it's almost like a bit of a business piece where they've introduced family as like a secondary order. But should that actually be the other way around, which is actually I want to spend time at home and it's really all about my family, and this allows me to do this other business stuff, which is really how I earn the money to do it. I just wonder if it's presented one way, but actually the driver of adoption is actually something else.
It's a really interesting point. So I think it's about who's the buyer. Like, who's going to buy this technology? It's going to be the company.
It's going to be the business, right?
And what does the company want? The company wants like productivity.
Yeah.
And happy employees make for like better customer service experiences, better interpersonal experiences with their coworkers. So it's in your interest to develop a better home life balance and manage tempers and manage emotions that people have and the conflicts that we all have as humans. But I think that you can talk all day long about what you think it'll do, but what people actually use it for is the gold standard of what we should do next.
Yeah.
And I think that it was explained to me really cogently by Brett Kinsella, one of the leading analysts in this space. He explained it as previously when we were looking at AI, it was in front of us. It was the Alexa, it was the Google Assistant, and we were talking to it. And that was the relationship. But where the relationship is moving to is the AIs alongside us.
Yeah.
It's looking over our shoulder going, oh, I could help you a little bit with that. Or would you like, if it might be easier if you did this? Or have you noticed the other? And, oh, gee, I hadn't. Great, thanks. And, it's giving you those little, doing little jobs on the side for you and handing it over to you or making you notice something. And it's just like a really helpful co-worker. It's like a co-pilot. And I think it's a good brand name. I think its strength has been such that it's gone ubiquitous for a description of it. So like other companies have Google's Copilot. Is it just not an assistant? Is it? No, it's a Copilot. It's like Microsoft Word. It's not a word processing document. It's Microsoft Word. So I think they've done a great job of that. And I think it's analogous to IBM back in 2003, I would say, when they came out with cloud, because there was no cloud concept before that. And then they started to popularize the word cloud, and people started to go, oh, this must be a normal thing, and started spending more time looking at it or evaluating it. I think we're at that kind of, what is this space called? What's it doing? What can I expect it to do? But I think that if I was running a class and saying to people, how would I get a technology out there in front of the world as fast as possible, no matter what it is, I'd say find a way for someone to represent themselves in it. Do you remember those apps where you take a picture of yourself and it would show you in 20 years, or show you as a baby, or show you as the opposite gender? And people love it, right? They love seeing ourselves. We love seeing ourselves in things. So I don't think it's any mistake that the visual aspects of generative AI really grab people's attention. It's like, here's me as Lego. Here's me as a character from a Lego movie. Here's me as a sponge animal or as a Muppet. And then here's me as a Muppet on the moon. Here's a movie of me as a Muppet on the moon. But you'll notice that it's all me still. It's kind of like, it's entertainment, or that's how it gets into our mind that, oh, this AI is really quite powerful. But then you start thinking, okay, how would I use this at work? Like, this is the next thing. It's okay, actually, if I had pictures of my sneakers on people, or if I was selling clothes, what would change? If I was selling services, what would change? And you start thinking more in that area.
Yeah, the productivity changes, I mean, are huge, aren't they? And it just allows you to be so much more productive. But I suppose, how does that come back to things like security and concerns around privacy and those kind of things? And it's been talked about, do we need to regulate it? You got the EU AI Act that seemed to come out a few years before, actually. In some ways, it's been talked about for a while, and it's almost like they were almost like predicting it. What's your kind of view on regulation, and particularly around the concern there is in the media around the dangers around it as well? Is it just a case of that we're just afraid of something we don't understand, or do you think there's more to it?
No, I think there's more to it. But from a practical point of view, like, we've been in this space for years, and we've run a conference called ConverCon back in 2017, and we've always had a layer at the conference for AI ethics and AI governance, because we strongly believed that AI was coming and it needed to not turn into social media, right? It needed guide rails, it needs rules, it needs regulations, but it also needs companies to understand behavior and governance. So the quick lessons here are, I believe, anyone who pays attention to data integrity anyway, like GDPR, data at rest, data, where's it going? Anyone who's paying attention to that stuff anyway, this is significantly the same. It's like, where's my data? Where is it going? How's it being processed? What's it being used for? Do we have the right permissions in place to do this? Is this managed in a policy? Who's in charge of it? The standard enterprise questions that you would expect anyone to ask in our business. It's just that everybody needs to start thinking like that. It's like, where's my data going? How's it been minded? Just standard stuff, right? But just do the standard good job of understanding how your data is being used, where it's going, and what actions are being performed on it. And I think it goes a long way to removing the concerns, and it'll drive out any issues that you have concerns about, because your compliance people will see it. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is, just in terms of the large language models themselves, and I'll just use the term ChatGPT because everyone understands what that is, right? But I'll come back to that as well. Just when you're using ChatGPT, it's like a use policy. Like, you had an employee use policy to say, look, we don't mind if you're using the internet. Everyone has to check when their deliveries are due or whatever. But we also know that you have to use it to do your job. Like, for whatever reasons, your company, everyone has to use the internet at some point to do their job now. So it'll be similar. everyone has to have access to AI to do their job. It'll be a similar kind of, what's our policy? Is it clearly communicated? Does everyone understand it? How do we enforce it? How do we measure it? How do we prove it? So it's going to be the same kind of governance policy, I believe. Again, from a practical point of view, I think that's how it'll get handled. And when you're looking at a developer and you say, you didn't just copy all the code and put it into GPT, did you? No, don't ever do that. So you have to educate people that you can't just indiscriminately throw things at an outside business like that and not be at risk of compromising something that this company cares about. So again, it's just part policy, part education to say, we know that you're going to use it. Just to give you a quick example, right? Let's say you're writing a letter, which is going to be the lowest level kind of risk thing that you want to do there. Don't use your real name, right? Don't use your company's name. Don't use the company's name that you're writing to. Don't use any details of your account that you might be able to identify. All you're looking for it to do is structure the letter, give you the right language, put in the name A Limited and B Limited, right? And let it generate it, and then take it off, and then edit it, and then confirm that you're happy with it, and then send it. But just be careful about the names you put in, the details you put in. There's always scare stories about every technology out there, but it's a little bit of common sense. Like, just don't throw your company information into an open environment like that.
I see it as, it's almost like my little mini helper. So, for example, if you're writing something, you can end up structuring a letter, those kind of things. And just if you were to have someone who was working for you doing it, you wouldn't just get someone off the street and then just say, go and write me a letter, and then just accept that's it and just put it straight into production. You'd have checks and balances. You'd review the letter before it went out. You'd make sure that you made sure that they were trained properly before you gave them additional responsibility. And I know that ChatGPT or generative AI, it's maths at the end of the day, but if we think of it almost like it is my mini helper, then I would have the same controls I should normally have. And I just wonder if we're thinking about it's almost our relationship with computers is going to have to change as being the computer's always right and it's going to be perfect, to being something that is, the computer might be right, just like a human might be. And we need to have some segregation of duties. We need to have some sort of governance around it, just like we would as if it was a human.
So today, tomorrow, and into the future, these are different time horizons for this technology. So today, it's really good practice to treat your AI as an intern, like smart graduate coming to work in your business. They're really smart, but they don't understand everything. And you just go, great work. Okay, that's very good. Okay, no, that's not what we call that. That's not what that means.
Okay, I need to do a little work in the background. Yeah.
And then you go, great. And then that works really fine. Now, there's going to be tricks. I call them tricks, but they're really advances in the technology, right? So you might say, remember all the ways I like to edit, and remember the corrections I make to these kinds of letters. And then when you're generating them in the future, generate them with those edits in them. And so it'll learn your style. It'll learn how you like to communicate. It'll learn how your policy, like of how you want to do things. So it will remember your settings, whatever else you want to call it. And where that then becomes interesting is, it's like, how much more information do you want to give it? And then how much more action do you want it to take on your behalf? And then that's policy level kind of, I want you to be able to respond to an email from me, but I don't want you to commit me to anything. Or, I'd like you to respond to it. And if it's a request for a meeting, a call, or anything else, organize that and put it in my calendar and commit to it if I can on. So it'll be levels of actions, levels of permissions.
That's a governance thing as well. That's a human governance thing, but we're going to governance on top of it.
Correct. And then the kind of third angle on it then is, as you're saying, the relationship to it is different at the moment. So for instance, you should never look at anything as a fact. Like it is not facty. It's a generative thing. It's not facty. So it doesn't know what your balance is. It doesn't know what your next payment date is. It doesn't know how likely or not you are to do anything. It doesn't have any of that data. It's not able to make those judgments. But I believe that as the technology evolves, there'll be other rails put into the process, into the pipeline. And it'll go, actually, you should be looking for a piece of data here. does that exist? Do we have a link to something that's saying that's the balance, or that's the next date, or this is the person, and validate them? And I think that it will evolve, and therefore it will link to APIs, it will link to enterprise data. There will be policies to put rails on everything, because that's how an industry matures. So I think it will, I don't think this is going to blow up and do something silly and everyone goes, oh, that was funny for the moment that it lasted. This is a fundamental shift in what computers are capable of. And I think that it's going to be a longer term change.
I suppose a bit of a concern I have around this talk around regulation is if people don't understand how it works or what it actually does, if the regulation also gets misplaced based off what we think it does rather than what it actually does. So, for example, there's some of the issues being raised, things around copyright as an example. So did it learn everything from copyrighted material? It's how most of my education was learned, or all of our education was learned. Or is it going to have over control of things, or the fact that it gets things wrong, and when actually there are policy controls around that? I just wonder if it becomes too focused on privacy, or if it becomes too focused on certain aspects that we understand today or we think it's going to do, will that lead to the wrong regulation that then restricts development? I
think it's, I can just speculate the way I think it's going to go. I think that they're going to make generative AI something that falls under all the regular AI ethics rules, the AI rules that the EU have done up. And it's not about the technology. It's about what you're doing with it. And do you have the permissions for it? So if you take visual surveillance, and you say, I don't mind having cameras in London. I don't mind, cameras on the street. Oh, I don't mind cameras in the shop. Actually, I don't mind camera in my car. I don't mind a camera outside my house when I'm coming into my house. I don't mind a camera in my house when I'm in my house. I don't mind Alexa being in my house. You don't mind any individual piece of that. But if someone had access to all of that and then was able to do something on top of that that was against your interest, you go, I don't like that. So it's more than just what individual systems are doing. It's what all the systems together are doing. And then what is your intention? Like, what you as a company or an organization or an individual, what are you trying to achieve with that information? Is that in the interests of society or people, or are you using it against their interest in some way? And I think that's why you need to have a body, and I know it's
register
hard.
And those sort of things. Yeah.
No, I think you do need to register, but I think the more to the point, like it's having the right. We found having this conversation over the years at ConverCon was that best companies are on top of this already, and what they have is they have committees, and they go, who's on the committee for AI ethics and oversight? Do we have a committee? Yes. Who's in charge? So who holds the bucket for this? Somebody has to be accountable for it. Who's accountable? Nobody. Okay, that's your first disconnect. Second, who's on the committee that discusses this and evaluates this and communicates to the rest of the business? Oh, it's all of us. Like, it's 5 college-educated, middle-aged white guys sitting around the table. You go, oh, second, that means you don't have a requisite diversity that reflects society and how it's likely to respond to the services that you're providing and how you're providing. So you have to make sure that you got representation on that body. And then you've got to bring those policies out to the rest of the business. And I've been really impressed by the way some companies have managed that in a really considered fashion. And thus every new technology that comes in and every new use case that comes in, there's a review process. Like, people look at it and they evaluate it, and they have people who are used to doing this and making those decisions. Now, there are some of the bigger companies who are very well set in this area, but in principle, I think companies will need to start making someone responsible for the AI, putting the policies in place, how we communicate it. And I think that's how it'll ultimately get managed at the company level.
Yeah. So you're almost saying, I know the EU AI Act is managed at that policy level, a bit like you regulate financial services, rather than regulating the technology itself, regulate the policy and the inputs and the outcomes from that, and let the technology do its thing in between to protect society as much as anything.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to go. Personally, I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not any expert in AI ethics. But just, again, referring to how quickly everything changes, in this area. The minute you regulate for one thing, like another major game changer could occur. To give you an example, so around February, when ChatGPT came out and GPT-4 then was the big one, they were talking about the number of parameters in it and the number of tokens and the size of the database. And you were hearing these numbers and you go, oh my God, these numbers are huge. And then another company would come out and go, we've got twice as many parameters and 3 times as many tokens. Oh my God, it's 3 times as big as the last big thing. And then a moment occurred, and around the back, the university said, oh, we've got a language model that does all that stuff, and it only has 1 million parameters. Well, but I thought we were going up. We didn't need to go up. We changed the way the model works. We needed far fewer parameters, and you can put this on a phone. Yeah. What? You can actually just get it, put it on a phone? So, yeah. Oh, what's the next one? Oh, I've got a smaller model, and it's 3 times the size of power of that last model. Oh, hold a second. We're going the other way now. So how would you regulate for that kind of a breakthrough at a tech level? So I think it's about controlling at business level. Okay, there's operations, governance, oversight. That's like in the kind of businesses that we're in, we understand how that has to happen. It's very regulated now. There's strong governance in place. It fits into that mindset. And people who have that mindset anyway will understand, no, don't do that, can't do that, wouldn't do that, can't do that. And they won't fall for that. Like they just won't fall for it. I think it's where, it's people who have access to this technology now and are able to generate. People will always, like the ones that will grab the headlines will always be the very negative use cases, right? Because it's our human nature to respond to that. But nonetheless, if your image is out there and, hey, I'm pretty sure that I could go through all your podcasts, throw them into a large language model, clone your voice, replicate your syntactic gestures, and create an entirely synthetic podcast for you. And I could actually get ChatGPT to structure the topic, pick the topic. I could get it to generate news. I could get it and say it all in your voice. Yeah. And you'd go.
And probably get more viewers.
You would get more views because you'd be able to tell it to optimize, right?
Yeah.
And so just to give you an example of how the speculation of how that's getting used today is the guys in Spotify are saying, oh, a second now, we've got all these people like, let's say Joe Rogan, right? 100 million or more probably listeners every couple of days on his podcast. And you're a car dealer down here in County Cork. And you're saying, do you know what? I'd really love it if on my Spotify stream, I had Joe Rogan saying, Paul Sweeney's BMW sales, they're amazing cars. He's the best guy. Go talk to him. I know him very well. And that ad comes out in Joe Rogan's voice. And it goes to listeners just in the Munster region of Ireland who've been identified through their IP address and segmentation and all the rest. And so Joe Rogan's voice has been cloned. The copy's been generated by, again, just generate me copy that'll sell, generate me the best copy to sell a BMW if Joe Rogan was the guy saying it, and then just pay your money and pump it through the network, right? And so you're going, that's just localization, maximizing a brand voice or a brand asset of Spotify, and then they redistribute. And you can, that might be a harmless case. But what if they got your podcast voice from the internet and they made you say some really horrible things? And they promoted the podcast and they defamed your name and they got you picked up by various news outlets who fell for it. That's really negative. But it's the same tech. It's like the same tech used in just entirely different intentions, I should say. So I think I've yet to really see some. Actually, no, that's incorrect. I have seen some amazing things happen with the baseline technology that gives me not pause, but it tells me that this is bigger than we are capable of understanding right now. And just give you an example of why I think that's the case. The exact same technology was used to understand how proteins unfold in a DNA strain, a genomics sample. And it was untrained. So it trained itself, it figured out what was going on, it figured out the genes, it figures out how proteins unfold. And prior to this, it would take a PhD researcher, his PhD or her PhD, it would take them to 3 years to establish how it was going to happen. They'd have to write it all out, do their experiments, and that would be their thesis. The large language model did all the proteins in 3 months, all of them. This was an impossible project, and it was done in 3 months. And you start going, okay, what else could this start to sense? Can this model be used to sense other things? And I think that the innovation space in front of us for this is huge, which is why I think we need to really start thinking about it.
Yeah, and I suppose a couple of things there is just going back to the almost like the fraud case. I mean, you think about debit cards as an example, or transactions, right? They've got great use, but they also have this fraud use as well. And so I quite like analogies. So do we think of that almost as an analogy for that with these kind of models, which is these things are going to happen. How do you put guardrails and policies in place and investigations to make sure that it doesn't happen? So in your example as well, so I just wonder if there's that kind of analogy. So can we use analogies to then put some of those guardrails in place?
I think we have to, but this is the job. We have to figure out, how do we start thinking about it? So thinking in analogies, thinking on, okay, this is our process today. How might this change? If this were to happen tomorrow, how would that change? Identity and fraud is an obvious one. People, like, if you can have your voice clone, if it can generate like an absolutely pitch perfect voice, how are you doing? Like, you go to your vendor, right? And you go, look, if this happens, how are you guys set up to identify that? What's your strategy for doing that? And they might go, actually, we don't have a strategy for that because we haven't seen it yet. But then you go, you guys need to come back with a strategy on that because we think it's inevitable that this is going to crop up. And now you're feeding into their concerns that they're hearing from their marketing, going, hey, we need to figure this one out.
And I suppose that gives a whole new sort of level of services that end up being produced. So what gets lost in terms of us doing some of the productivity gains ends up getting replaced by new services that have to get created as a result, I would think.
I suspect so. Like, I like keeping track of the things I called wrong as much as the things I called, because you probably learn more from it. And I remember when the facial ID and the card tap technology was coming out, I was going, are you really telling me that it's so convenient that I'm not going to just take out my credit card and tap? Like, oh, I have to tap it on my phone. Yeah. That's your big innovation. Yeah. And it's like, oh, actually it was. It was totally a game changer. And then I don't even have to do anything. It just sees me. Yeah. And validates it. And off I go. It's like touchless, cardless, but it sees me, authenticates me, enables the transaction, gives me the receipt, and I go off. And it was just that little bit easier. Now, we had the pandemic, which accelerated the whole thing. But I like thinking of it as, I just carry my phone with me. I'm sure it's everyone. I carry my phone with me. But because my card is on my phone, I no longer carry a wallet. And because I no longer carry a wallet, I hardly ever carry a bag anymore. And because I don't carry a bag, effect. And so I think that what will happen is you'll see this, like, changes that are systemic like that, just kicking across everything. Like, what happens when you can be instantly authenticated because of whatever service, because you're just carrying your phone. It passively sees you. It knows that it's you. I've asked my assistant something, like my regular Google Assistant or Apple Assistant, and I say, oh, do I have any... No, we're not acting like this right now, to put my boot down. But it would be very handy for me just to be able to click on my Siri and go, hey, can you make sure that XYZ happens today and inform me if my daughter spends more than €20 today, because I'd really like to keep an eye on her, on her spending. And I go away, right? And the agent goes away now. My intelligent agent has gone away, and it's said, okay, nothing happened yet. Oh, she spent €30. Yeah. Come back, pop up an alert. Yeah, she's going to spend €30. And I told you that I'm going to put a block on your card now, and that's your spending gone for the week. And I'm right. And so that behaviors will change. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what behaviors change and how they cascade. But the identification, verification thing, it's like a passive service in the background. And I'm interested to know what happens next. So what next?
Yeah, I think it frees us up to, like, the brains up to do something else. And I think when you're going through that example, one of the things I'm finding with facial ID is you end up forgetting more of your passwords, right? So as an example, right? So you're trying to work out what it was, or you're having to reset them all the time, or those kind of things. But it creates this almost like unintended consequences and sort of behavioral change as a result of us doing these things.
Absolutely. And as well, I think analogous to that is, I think we start forgetting names too, and navigation, how to get from A to B and route ahead, and do I go this way or that way, how at this time of day, you stop, just turn it on, what's the best way?
Even facial recognition. So we've not met in person, right? But when we meet in person, it'll be like, you're not a little bit different from the screen because you're in 3D and you're like in reality, and you might be saying, "Oh, Chris, you put on a little bit more weight than you were on the screen," or maybe, hopefully not. But it's kind of like it changes. The perceptions are slightly different, and the real person becomes the person on the screen through the pandemic versus the person you actually necessarily meet. And so it's kind of like we're trying to blend reality versus not in some ways.
I think that's a good example there of digital interactions, humans and artificial humans interactions, and then human to human kind of contact, like physical in the same space as somebody. And I think that these are gradations in how and what kind of relationship you need to have with someone to get something done. So for instance, meeting online and talking to people, it's really important in your workday to stop, ask the person how they are, what's going on in your area, how's your dog, are you getting out at all, and build some social time into it, because we've built our meetings back to back. Oh God, Zoom all day long, right? And we actually degrade all our relationships because we don't take time to care for the other person, to show them that they're part of something, that I've remembered what you said last time, and you build those relationships. Now, I think that can change. I was using Google Meet for the first time in a long time yesterday, and it said, "Your background seems a little darker. Would you like to brighten it?" I went, "Yeah," and just a little wipe across the screen, and everything brightened up. I said, "Oh, that's nice." He goes, "You're looking a little tired today. Would you like me to remove the circles from under your eyes and just give you a little bit of a skin glow?" And I go, "Actually, I do. I would like that." And he goes, "Zoom again." He says, "Actually, your voice would be more receptive to others if you just took out the uptone a little bit and then the downtone."
Sounded like Joe Rogan.
"Actually, do that a little bit there. That'd be great." So now you're talking to me and you're meeting and you're interacting with me, but you're not, because I've changed things a little bit to present myself a little bit better, right? And you go, that doesn't seem like a good thing to do. Kids do it day in, day out for everything. Like they will Snapchat as bunny rabbit heads, and they will create characters that they represent themselves at. They will put things on their heads. They do all this all day long anyway. And your voice is going through a service like this, and it's taking the top out and it's smoothing things out, and it's just making you sound a little bit better, a little bit higher quality. And you go, that's just good service. That's just good. Good. But is it me? Is that really me?
Do you think we're becoming part of the machine in terms of so we talk about embedding technology into our lives? Do you think we're getting embedded into the technology lives? And so it's becoming like one and the same, where it becomes, and there was this, it was around almost that point of unity, right? I can't remember what it was.
The singularity,
The singularity.
Yeah,
do you think we're getting near that, where it's becoming, is there a danger of it?
No, I don't. Look, I'm sure there's people far smarter than me going, I just don't understand the danger, right? Let me give you a really silly example of a completely different area, and it'll hopefully relate back. My wife and I were out in a local forest a couple of years ago, and we're walking along in late August, and we walked by this apple tree. I went, "Oh my God, all the crab apples are out." And we looked at all the berries and we said, "We could just make crab apple jam. It'd be lovely, right?" And we're just picking them off, and we went, "Hold on a second, we need something to put them in." And says, yeah, and it'll be really simple to make. I'll make a basket. Sis, we'll make a basket. And then you look around you and you go, there's nothing really here to make a basket from. And, oh, okay. And we tried and everything fell apart. And so your basket is a basic tool. A knife is a basic tool. You pick them, you put them in a basket, you carry them somewhere else. It allows you to carry more things than you could before and without damaging them. And so we have always developed tools. We've always carried our knife with us for cutting. We've always carried our hammer and our ruler and our things for our jobs. And you could say you would never see him without his toolkit. You never see that guy without his whatever. He carries it with him. It becomes a part of his job and maybe a part of his identity, because I'm a carpenter, I'm a mechanic, or I'm an accountant or whatever, and identity rolls into it. I don't see it as being any different than it's just another tool that you'll figure out how to use. It'll help you do your job or not. And maybe you'll develop some relationship with it or not. But I'm not really convinced yet that we develop relationships with technology. I don't think we wake up and go, I must talk to Mr. Busy and see how he's doing today. He's got this Talamaki thing or whatever. We just don't do that.
Yeah.
But there are people out there who, because they don't have social contact, because they're isolated, they have a proxy to a relationship by having a digital human that they can talk to and who asks them questions and who remembers things about them and who seems to care about them. But that's not us wanting a relationship with the technology. It's a technology substituting for a relationship we don't have in real life. So I don't think that we're heading towards any kind of singularity. I think we have a set of tools that are actually more going to be passively keeping an eye on us for our own health and well-being than proactively engaging with us and being like a bantery mindset. If you're using an Apple Watch now, if you wanted to really get into it, it would figure out, you know what, Paul, your heart rate went up for that meeting. Were you worried about something? It's not what I'm doing, but it could do that. It is keeping track of my heart rate. It's keeping track of my perspiration. It could keep track of my glucose, my blood sugar. And now I need to triangulate what's driving this: time of day, exercise, eating. Okay, do I need to know more about those? And what's it doing to help me? And it's passively managing these things until we ask it to do something like, hey, Apple, I think I'd like to actually lose a couple of pounds over the next couple of weeks. What do you suggest? Because I suggest you just walk after your meal, and every second night you do the following. And estimated weight will be half a stone in 2 months just by doing that. And I go, oh, that's great. Will you remind me to do that? Yeah, sure. I'll send you a little notification. And that's AI working to help you manage your physical well-being. But it's not like a really invasive, it's not mind melding with you in some way. All it's doing is it's gathering data. It has the tools then to act on that data, and you'll probably have to tell it what you want it to do. It's not going to turn around and surprise you with, I've spotted these things that you should be worried about. We'd take off that watch in a minute and go, I don't want to be worried about whether I'm going to get hair cancer from walking in a city street. Just stop. So that, I think it mentally, the interesting things I think are coming from the fact that there's so much more to measure. There's so much more to sense. We can sense our body's performance, what's going on with our bodies. Before, we'd have to go to a doctor, go to a big surgery with all the machines. They would do that once in a while. The technology now allows us to do this on a continuous basis, which gives us more data and more context in our lives. And the more context it has and the more data it has, the more it's able to sense and help us understand why certain things are happening or what might happen.
Yeah, I suppose that's the only concern that I do have, and I don't have concerns about it at the moment, is that as human beings, we can only sense, for example, let's say 20 factors or 50 factors. This can do at an extreme, it could do 50,000. And in terms of writing things, so if you're getting it to produce a piece, it might take me a day to do, right, or a half day to do. It will be able to do that in 10 minutes, and it'll be able to produce 100 of them in 10 minutes. And it's almost like that competition. We could lose out with competition, and this might be down the road in it in terms of. And I suppose it's around the policy to make sure that doesn't happen, make sure it's done for the benefit of society, which is the humans in society, rather than necessarily the machine itself. And I suppose that's the only concern that I think I have at the moment. But that's projecting so far in the future, because at the moment it's helping me do my job, right?
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced of the runaway AI theory yet. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but at the moment, I'm not too worried about that. I think that all the interesting things that are happening are things that we would not have thought about. And there were separate amazing breakthroughs happen. For instance, genomic databases and understanding the very essence of biology, meeting the breakthrough in AI and in data and in cloud, all coming together to say, actually, we now have enough computing power, enough process, and enough understanding to start figuring out the enormous complexity of a biological system, such that we can now figure out triggers for why something happens, like that protein shifts here when this happens because you were predisposed to it because of this relationship. And now we can just generate a hyper-targeted solution to that problem, right? Just compounds that can be created, manufactured, and delivered like within a day, like to you, like entirely hyper personalized. That's a complete game changer, as up there with having healthcare at all. Like, we take it for granted. I always go to my dentist and I thank them for their education, because going to a dentist 100 years ago was no small event, right? Yeah. It was a big deal. So I'm grateful that we have the standards of dentistry and care that we have these days. And the same with the healthcare system. What happens when the next layer of breakthrough technologies happen and we're able to get into the finer details of the things that are making us unhealthy? And possibly the other way, once you start going, this is all because of saturated fats, these kind of oils, they have these kind of impacts on the proteins, they have these kind of impacts on your body. Once you understand those relationships, now you can go back and start going, well, guys, you can't make food like that. You got to change those ingredients and drive them out of the system. So I know I've gone very broad on all the AI stuff, but I think that if I was to make what's my major point here, it's we're on the cusp of a change that is huge. It's scary that we've had like cloud, we've had mobile, we now have AI, and the cycles at which they're coming in are faster and faster because they're layering one on top of the other. And so I think it's going to spread really quickly. People are already shown that they have a strong desire to use it. It will change the nature of work for a while, and then we'll reorganize ourselves. Like, we'll figure out, okay, actually, we'll just change the way we're organized, or the way work is organized.
Yeah. Do you think that people today, if they're not using it, they're going to fall behind? It feels some people have adopted it. Let's say it's 20-30% of people are adopting it, and adopting it more than we think, as we talked about at the start.
Yeah.
If you're not using it, are you going to lose out in the competition with the people who are?
100%. I've absolutely no doubt, like zero doubt. Like, you're going to lose out. You have to figure it out.
Yeah. And I suppose I want to come back to web chat and consumer interaction and those kind of things. I know you guys have been working on it with debt chat and some of that. I mean, where do you think large language models take that world and take the messaging, communications world and the two-way chat into the future? What's next for that, do you think?
It's interesting. We have our view. I'm not saying that it's, obviously we believe strongly in it, but I'm not going to say it's the absolute truth, right? Because it could evolve another way. So our view on it is that every organization should have their own AI model, and they should be able to control it from head to toe, understand how everything works in it, and be fully accountable for what happens in that model. And you have to be, because you operate in a regulated environment. So you have to be able to explain how everything was decided upon, and then you have to be able to back it up as to why it did that. And every industry, to some degree, I think, will have to struggle with how do we do that. The view that we've taken is, and from our experience of working with companies, is simple things, very simple things, like that was a successful payment, or that was a successful promise to pay, or that was a successful XYZ, whatever. They all get defined slightly differently in every company. They all have little different ways of thinking about something being done or completed or defined or labeled. And so what we wanted to do is give everyone the understanding that it's their labels, it's how they've labeled it, it's how they've defined it. That's what's training their model. It's trained on their data and their conversations. So it's not synthetic data. It's actual conversational data from your customers speaking to you. It's not theoretical. It's actual. And the analogy there is, would you rather drive a car that was driven around Birmingham for a couple of months, or would you rather buy a car that was trained on YouTube videos? It's no, I'll take the car that was trained on the real live data, please. So our view is you take the real conversational data, you understand it, you train the model to understand the context of that data. Give you an example. An example of even a short phrase can be very ambiguous, like, I'd love to pay, but I can't pay right now, or I don't seem to be able to pay right now, or some phrase like that. You'd look at that and you've got to be able to pick out all of the details of that sentence and go, I'd love to pay, positive, but I can't, negative. Right now, why right now? Is it at the beginning of a sentence or beginning of a conversation? That would be, maybe they don't have available funds. The follow-on question to that is, has something happened? Has circumstances changed that we need to understand more? But at the end of a conversation, after a length of conversation, maybe it refers to the gateway isn't taking the payment. It's rejecting the card. They don't seem to be able to get their PIN number right or something. They're having a problem. They can't pay right now. There's something going on. So where a phrase is in a sentence, where it is in a conversation, can change the meaning of that sentence. And therefore you get into this concept of different embeddings. So they're structured differently. The relationships between words and phrases are different. And so what we've done is we've spent a good lot of time working with customers, building these models with them. And then therefore those models are the conversational AI that drives their conversations. So the tricky bit then is, okay, that's great. Where's the data coming from? So you've got to be like in a relationship with a company where they're willing to share the data with you. And then they share that data how? It's like over an API. It's like that's the amount of money, that's the date, this is the time, this is the person. This is all kind of data that you can't throw over to a generative AI. And it's why we have generative AI kind of technology, conversational AI. We have our own natural language understanding engine, dialogue engine, and we have our own then API. And so together, you're able to get the data in, you're able to workflow it properly, and then you're able to use the right pieces of AI together in a kind of governed fashion to make sure that everything's happening the way it should be.
So if I just almost like simplistically, it's almost like you have the general base level primary education that might be general, but then you have the university education that's specific to particular companies based off their data, so they can give really accurate kind of predictions and training as a result of that.
Correct. It's basically fine-tuned language model is what it is. It's a fine-tuned language model. And so when you're looking at a simple chat solution, I feel bad doing this, right? But it's also a bit of fun. If you go to a website and you press on the chat and you go, hey, I'd like to look at your whatever, right? It comes back and going, hey, thank you for thinking of us. And then you say something else. And it goes, please leave your email. Yeah. Go, that's not web chat. Yeah. That's a way of collecting someone's email. And the amount of times that happens, it's kind of like, why'd you even bother having that bubble there? So the thing about conversational chat is you're trying to get to a stage where you got this balance between you maybe understand why a customer's on this page or this part of the page, but you want to leave them say something and go, oh, okay, actually you're looking for this, and handling that exception to why they're probably 80 to 90% here on this page, and say, oh, okay, now I understand. And then come right back and go, this is the thing you were looking for, and go, oh, it was.
Yeah.
And it's all then, it's going to be as good as your data. It's going to be as good as your training. It's going to be as good as your design. It's not going to be anyone who's turned around and say everything's magic out of the box. Has probably never worked with that thing before. But we're very excited about it because we have a background in all this conversation design stuff. And now we're saying, okay, SMS conversations, messenger conversations, web chat conversations, they're all conversations. You're using your AI to drive all these. And now you can execute things, like you can do transactions, you can confirm people's payments, you can take payments, you can confirm a future payment date with them. You can actually do account level interaction stuff with them, which allows them, of course, to automate. And so when I'm talking to people about AI, sure, there's interesting things about models and how multiple models can be used to make this happen. But as a business, you're probably there going, does this help me automate? Going, yeah, it helps you automate. So, yeah, because it's just automating the conversation.
But in some ways, it's a bit like the ChatGPT example was saying, which is it becomes your mini helper, doesn't it? Because it allows you to do things that allows you to then redeploy resources elsewhere to then do something else that's more interesting and more valuable.
I almost feel like saying, keep an eye in this space. I'm not saying this is us and that we're releasing this soon, because that'd be breaking my marketing people's hearts. But you're right. Like the best way to think about this is that it's an intelligent assistant for the customer.
Yeah.
And now it's what happens next.
Yeah.
So web chat is on every website, but it's so underutilized. It's just the customers know how to use it. There it is. I know how to expect. I click it. Something should be happening. And most of the time, nothing's happening when that happens.
Yeah.
And if you imagine that chat assistant is just going to become a digital assistant, it doesn't matter. Like it's chat. It's like it could pop up, it could take half your page, it could guide you places, you could speak to it, you can ask it things. It will become a digital assistant or a customer co-pilot. On the other side of it, you have an agent. So you're saying, how can you use AI to help an agent do their job? And that is the kind of co-pilot role. And we've been talking to customers about this and working with them. And the things that you might think they want, they don't. They like, how many times do they want you to generate a response for them? Like they know 90% of the time what the response should be. Like they know they've gone through this conversation a lot of times. So you just want the right option populated, but you don't want to generate it. You want to know that's the option. That's the text reply I want. So I think that one of the things that agents really wanted was just speed. It's time to understanding that a thing needed to be done. Whatever that thing is, just understanding what this message needs to be responded to because it's important. The client has specified that they have some constraints. That means this is very time constrained and some other factor. So the AI understands that message needs to be prioritized. And it's just brought to the agent's attention. And just as was said by one of the companies we're working with, just having the ability to stop an agent and go, oh, think about this. That was valuable. Just go stop, think, oh, I should actually deal with that this way because they might probably know what to happen. And an example of that is like it's specified. A great example actually bringing all this together is vulnerability, where you're saying to people, I'd love to pay that bill, but unfortunately I lost my job very recently and we're going through a tough time. Is there something I can do? And you're saying, okay, I've expressed a text. In that text, it's expressing a financial vulnerability. You're giving it some sort of a measure, like a lost job is some sort of measure that you want to put on it. And now you want to label that as financially vulnerable and then do something with it. Now, it might be just saying, person's expressed a financial vulnerability. Please acknowledge that. I can just go, I'm really sorry to hear that, Paul. That can be a very tough change of life situation. Let's figure out how we're going to deal with it. And just gives you, as an agent, a reset that says, I understand that this is the case and I want to deal with it. Or maybe they're saying, oh, that's a vulnerable person now. I need to send them to a specialist who's trained in the way that this should be dealt with. So it's, oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm going to hand you over to someone who's really well trained in this and who's great record at helping people out. And I think that the speed at which you can recognize that and the surety of the action that you can take on the back of it isn't of the magnitude of, oh, we're going to develop an AI that understands all the bits of how you're speaking and all the nuances of your situation and generate the best response for you. It's okay, I can see in the future that could be a thing that might occur. But today, you just want to use the tools that are there to say, okay, don't let someone sit too long when they have expressed a particular situation, or make sure that people who have been maybe vulnerable, you've followed up with them. Like you've continued the conversation, you've done check-ins with them, you've made sure that they've done things that they said they were going to do. And I think what's happened, I've been reading some of the reports recently on some of the bigger financial services companies in our space. And what they seem to be leading with these days is we've helped 4 million people get out of debt successfully. And that's a really interesting reframing of an industry. It's saying, rather than saying that we're the most effective debt collection agency or we were the most dollar per pound collected agency, we actually helped 4 million people get out of debt. We did so where people were happier at the end of the process than they were at the beginning of the process. And we impacted brand equity in the following measures, which has a market valuation of Y. And you go, oh, okay, that's actually a really interesting turn of events into what might be required going into the future. It's going to be figuring out not just a date or a future payment date or getting promises to pay. It's going to be figuring out who needs to be interacted with, what kind of problems are they going to need solved, what kind of skills your agent's going to need to help them navigate that, and who's doing this. And I think that's really interesting and a genuine shift in what an industry might actually end up thinking its job is. There is, again, there is always, we need to be responsible in credit and the type of credit that's given. People need to be responsible in the credit that they take out, and we need to be responsible in how we help them deal with whatever credit situations they're in. And there's many different types. And I think that with the availability of so many tools and so many digital products, I'm wondering what the service looks like going forward. Is it micro-targeting, micro-niching, micro-journeys? Is it much more behavioral? Is it much more, or is it just simply helping people have better conversations as individuals?
But I think it's interesting what you're saying is we can talk about all these exciting things, and it's great that we can look at all these extra parameters, but really at the end of the day, you've got to narrow it down to one or two things and making customers' lives easier. And it might be that they might be the aha moment that what we thought from our frame of reference the customer wanted is actually not what they wanted, or actually the solution might actually be a very simple solution rather than something that's going to be way more complicated. And even though we go through all this complexity, we actually come back to some very simple and very familiar measures. We can just do it in a lot more detail than we ever could before. And
again, I think that feels correct. That feels like how life works out. It's like the amount of complexity and development that goes into this phone being able to see you and authenticate you through a camera so that you can tap and go in a supermarket. The amount of technology behind that is astronomical. But the experience is I just walk by a little machine and I tap my way out. It's a small moment with an enormous stack of development behind it. And I have a feeling that the way the kind of it ends up looking in the application is it's just a number of small things in the application that have a huge layer underneath it to make it happen.
Yeah.
So you could work for a year on a feature and it just shows like one little thing on a sidebar that goes, actually, this customer has gone from being likely to pay and happy to unlikely to pay and unhappy in the last two turns of this conversation.
Yeah.
We need to think about what happened here and figure out what the next best action is.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of thinking of this as like in context of the other challenges in the industry, like how do we recruit people? How do we train people? How do we keep people motivated? How do we keep people on culture that we want to have? And how do we use our co-pilot to do that? Like, how do we do that? And maybe what we get is we get people ramped up a lot faster. We give them hints and understandings of what's happening in a conversation in a live way. And they get to be the best agents that they could have been a lot faster, and now suddenly are much happier in their roles because they have mastery of their role. They know what's happening. They know how to deal with it. They're not surprised by things, and they get to make a difference. Now, like I say this quite openly in that I grew up in a house where we got bills arriving that we couldn't pay, and it caused stresses and strains. I've been through it myself, and it can be a very stressful situation. And the biggest mistake people make is they don't engage. And if you can engage with people, and then you can build that rapport with them and build a way that we're going to solve this, we're going to figure it out. Now, we'll understand how we're going to move through this. And people just get that sense of it was okay. Like the world didn't end. It was nowhere near as bad as I thought this was going to be.
Yeah.
And then they experience something and they go, actually, I'm going to get through this and I can get through other things. And then they do get through it. I think if agents understood that the person that they helped or met 2 months ago has now become debt free, and you understood that you played your role in that, I think that would change your mind a little bit, right? Yeah, you know what? I helped three. You go home and you'd tell someone, actually, the 3 people I met and worked with, they were all declared debt free today, and we sent them a card, and it was a thumbs up from all of us, and it was great.
And I certainly hope that this whole conversation allows us to do some of those nice and more human things. That sort of has to be the hope of it, doesn't it? So.
It's already changing. It's like I think you were saying, do I need to look at this? Like 100% you need to look at this. This isn't a kind of if and but. This is, you've got to look at this. The major issue I think we were looking at is, technology is important and going through, but if you've got the right oversight, governance and processes, you'll drive out those issues. You'll figure that out. Just make sure that this is a part of that process, that you're doing that. Yeah. And then the next layer is, it's probably going to change some small things in your applications and services first, but then it could gradually get more and more. It's that snowballing effect. And once it's in place, and once you've got your processes and relationships in place, then it cascades and figure out it. Again, what we've seen is some processes are like 50-50 automated, person, human. The ones that are 100% automated, they disappear for the company and they have outsized effects for them. It's, if I could automate that whole process, something kind of changes in the business, something fundamentally changes. And I think that end-to-end automation will happen for some conversations, and then that opens up the space to change the nature of the service that you're giving later on. And that's why I think digitization and AI is going to change the nature of the services that people deliver in the longer term.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating to watch. Paul, thank you very much for making the time. I really appreciate it. And,
no problem.
And we've got to make sure we catch your podcast, Credit Shift, as that comes out too as well. So sign up there too.
Hopefully there'll be some interesting conversations to be had.
I have no doubt. Thanks, Paul.
No problem.